You finally left. You did the hard thing, and now your brain keeps replaying him. The conversations, the moments, the versions of him that you wanted him to be. You're not going backward. You're not weak. You're not broken. Your brain is trying to finish something that the relationship didn't allow you to complete. And I'm going to show you exactly what it's doing and what you can do to lay it to rest. Welcome to The Other Side. My name is Carrie Hudson. I'm a therapist and a guide, helping women to break toxic relationship patterns, reclaim confidence, and develop a blueprint for healthy, lasting love. And in this video, we are going to talk about why you can't stop thinking about him. And not just thinking about him, ruminating about him. We're going to discuss what rumination is, why distractions actually make it worse, and the one thing you can do to actually lay it to rest. So if this speaks to what you need, settle in. Rumination is actually a function of anxiety, and it is founded and rooted in a belief of the anxious attachment that says that how other people treat me is a reflection of me, right? And so I have a significant amount of control in how people show up for me in relationships. And this really comes from early childhood experiences of trauma, where as a child, you have been severely mistreated, even abused or neglected in relationships. And ultimately, your core needs were not met. Needs around physical care and needs around emotional care. And when this happens, it sort of creates this dynamic where you or this child who experiences this turns on themselves. And that, in essence, is the trauma. So these terrible experiences or neglectful experiences are taking place, and the child is internalizing them and making these experiences their fault versus understanding that this is actually the fault and the responsibility at this particular time during childhood of the person who is caretaking for them. And ultimately, this isn't just anyone. It's someone you have repeated regular contact with. So in most cases, it's going to be a caregiver. As you grow up and become a school age child, it can happen at school with bullies, so on and so forth. And so this dynamic says, and just a side note, even if it happens with bullies, there's still no support at home, not significant enough support emotionally to be able to regulate and understand what's happening. And so a child left to themselves, whether they are 3 or 13, will internalize, again, the behavior of others. And that develops, creates a sense of anxiety, because the question then becomes, what did I do to deserve treatment like this? What did I do to deserve what it is they're doing to me? And the reality is, if you sit with this from an adult perspective, and not even necessarily from an adult perspective, because an adult who was the child still has a hard time accepting and believing that how they were treated has absolutely nothing to do with them. And so I would take it one step further and say, from an adult perspective, looking at maybe another child, it becomes logical that, okay, this is just a child. This child didn't do anything to deserve how they were treated. And so there's nothing that they could actually do about it. Someone needs to help. Someone needs to step in. Someone needs to support this child. Someone needs to bring them out of this toxic and abusive situation. And that's ultimately what needed to happen for you. And so rumination develops because when someone is sitting in abuse, stirring in it, sitting in it, can't see their way out of it for significant amounts of time on end, then now I'm sitting with my thoughts because that's the only thing I have. Sometimes there's dissociation and avoidance, which is sort of the opposite end of all of this. But in this case, when anxiety sets in, the questions are, what did I do? How can I fix this? How do I get out of this? And there is, again, this process of turning on oneself, which again is the trauma. You are now the blame in your own head instead of recognizing that this person is responsible for their own behavior. And when you are the blame, then you grow up to put yourself in similar types of situations. Some people to an extreme, some people to less of an extreme, but really finding relationships with people who will replicate the same experience that you had in childhood. It is interesting how it happens, and I don't have the explanation for why it happened, but it is an unconscious thing. There is an unconscious driver that's in the seat of your life, and it's directing you right back to the same type of person and the same type of relationship dynamic. And there's something internally that is just felt and known when you come into contact with someone who might be similar to the person who abused you, someone who's emotionally unavailable, someone who's volatile, someone who's emotionally neglectful, someone who is abusive, right? You find yourself, this is sort of the person that you're attracted to. And in many cases, that attraction comes with that spark, right? There's an excitement that develops once you come into contact with someone like this because, whoo, now I get the chance to try this all over again and fix what was broken before. And therein lies the problem, right? The anxious person wants to repeat what's happened so that they can rewrite the story and fix it. And the reality is that there's no rewriting this story. But the anxious person is going to do it over and over and over again. It's called repetition compulsion. Okay? And when you are in this cycle, and you get to the end of it with a person or in a particular relationship, and that relationship ends badly, which it's going to, given what we're chasing after, now I'm sitting with the thoughts of, what did I do wrong? How do I fix this? What am I going to do differently next time? So I'm going to continue to take steps and make strides to fix myself so that this person shows up in a way that I need them to. So this person meets my needs. So this person loves me. I'm going to prove to them that they should love me, right? And, if this were to be accomplished, it would be a wonderful win. The challenge is that it's a path towards a dead end and a brick wall each and every time. And once that brick wall is reached, rumination sets in. And rumination is not just thinking about someone, right? There is a point at which a relationship ends, whether good or bad. If you've developed an attachment with someone and you've spent any significant length of time with them over a period of time, even if it was, 2 or 3 weeks, but almost every day, that is going to develop a level of attachment. There are expectations that are going to be formed. There is sort of a hope of a future that develops. And when that ends, all of that washes away or begins to wash away. But while it is washing away, then you begin to think about this person. They used to sit next to you on the couch. They live off of this freeway exit that you have to drive by. You went to this particular restaurant that you actually enjoy and you took them to your spot. And now their stain is sort of all over it because you've had such a good time with them at this particular restaurant, or maybe a terrible time. But usually in the reflection, there is thoughts of all the good times. There's no thoughts of how abusive this relationship was, how terrible it was, how this person disregarded you and made you feel. It is only the good times. And this is sort of a snapshot of exactly what happened in your childhood, because everything about this person who abused you was good in your own mind, right? And that's sort of a survival mechanism. It's the way we're all formed, right? Because We are coming into this world as little people who cannot function and survive on our own. So we are heavily dependent on the people who we call parents. And in most cases, that connection is still strongly tied to our birth parents, even if they are no longer in our lives. So, an adopted parent. But the relationship with an adoptive parent can be corrective if they really get to the heart of whatever issues may lay beneath the surface for you in a process of growing and healing. But ultimately, if there was trauma, mistreatment from the person you depended on, whether they were birth parents, blood family, or otherwise, it is going to create this disconnection, right? And you are going to think about them as good and increasingly think about yourself as bad or the problem, okay? And when you are the problem, your brain is working to fix it. It's almost like if you go into a kitchen and you touch a stove, your brain has to resolve what I can do in this kitchen to not be burned again. How I can hold this knife so I don't cut my finger again. Oh, I've got to be more careful. I've got to do things differently, right? But the difference between that is that's you and you walking into a kitchen, right? Or you and you driving a car. Immediately there's like regret or reflection, especially if you were at fault in an accident where it's like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I should have waited 5 more minutes. I should have, right? There's always this reflection about what I could have done to avoid this terrible thing that's now happening to me. So that's fairly natural, right? Our brain is positioned for survival. So it is programmed to help us to fix and regulate, right? But in this case, there is nothing to fix, okay? And you are driving yourself almost crazy, right? Constantly obsessing. This is where rumination becomes very different than thinking about someone. Obsessing over this person, and there is maybe some awareness of how toxic or abusive they were, but it doesn't take center stage. What's right in front is the wonderful things that you associated with them, the things that you maybe even projected onto them, right? Whether they're true or not. And then maybe some of the truth, right? Oh, the time where they doted on you and bought you the thing, and how they showed up in particular ways, which were usually the exception and not the rule. Okay. And so rumination is different from thinking about someone in that it's an obsession, right? It's a constant loop of thought that never gets resolved, right? When you walk into that kitchen, you know, oh, I need to wear a oven mitt. I need to be careful. I need to make sure before I grab a handle on the stove that I check to see if it's hot, or I grab something to keep myself from being burned, right? There is resolution there. Here, there is no resolution because you have actually probably begun to try all the things. You gave all you could. You did all you could. You did everything they asked you to do the way that they asked you to do it. You met their demands. You walked on eggshells. You diminished yourself to the point at which you couldn't diminish yourself anymore. You literally put yourself into a tiny box and allowed them to close the lid on you, and they still behaved the way that they did. And the problem with not resolving this is that rumination goes and goes and goes and goes, and then someone else eventually comes along. And now, I have another opportunity to do it again. And this becomes a distraction from what the rumination is actually trying to resolve, right? Rumination in and of itself isn't a bad thing. It is a loop. It is an open door that needs someone to walk through it. And when you just stay in the rumination and don't resolve it, and you then turn to a new relationship, you are widening that gap. You are deepening the trauma. You are adding more layers of pain and hurt on top of whatever already existed. Okay. And you didn't know any better, but this is the process that you are going through, right? And again, rumination needs to be resolved. It needs to be laid to rest. And so when you run into the next relationship in the same way with the same mindset, you might do some things differently, but the mindset is, how can I add on to the way in which I perform and the way that I caretake and the way that I diminish myself and shrink myself in order to please this person? And when you take those steps, you are distracting yourself from the issue at hand. Okay. And so, what really needs to happen is that you lean into the rumination. What is the rumination saying? What is it that you are actually trying to resolve? And in most cases, the thing that you're trying to resolve is something that is far outside of your control, which is why no resolution will come. Because you're trying to figure out ways of being different in order to please this person, and this person can't be pleased. They cannot be appeased. They will not be any different because you've chosen someone who represents the abuser that raised you, the toxic person who neglected you. They are a carbon copy of what it is that you actually want to overcome. And you don't overcome pain with more pain. You don't choose the same and expect something different. We all sort of have heard, probably at this point, that doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. And this process will literally drive you crazy. It'll lead you to depression. It'll lead you into deeper anxiety, right? Because now I can't do anything right with people. And now I'm a problem and I shouldn't be around people. And that level of isolation is dangerous for one's mental health. It is actually very detrimental. And so, in order to resolve the rumination, again, it's important to understand what the rumination is asking for, right? Stepping into that open door and exploring the room and turning on the lights and seeing all the ways in which you are in pain in that room and all the messages that you told yourself about yourself and how you've made yourself the enemy of you versus the people who have hurt and abused you. And I'm not saying that they are necessarily your enemy and that you wage war against them, but I think it's much healthier, right, to develop a level of anger for the people who put you in this emotional position, at least in the earlier stages of your life, than being angry with yourself. And it's recognizing the one thing that I say to my clients and the women I work with all the time, that you are not the blame. It is not your fault, but it is now your responsibility, right? Because now you are the one choosing the repetition. So it is important to wake up to understand that this little girl locked in this room, sitting in the dark, who's in pain and blaming herself and made herself the enemy, is actually not to blame. Because the one thing that your rumination needs to understand is that you are not responsible for the behavior of other people. And it's interesting because when people behave badly or in ways that are unexplainable, when they lie, when they cheat, when they steal, we're often trying to reason that, understand, like, well, why would they do that? Why would they cheat? Why would they steal? Right? Did I do something? Did I say something wrong? Why would they talk to me that way? But when people are kind and nice, we generally just associate that with who they are. We don't take responsibility for someone else's kindness generally. We usually say, oh, she was so nice. She was a pleasure to work with. Not, oh, well, I must have done something. And I think the deeper you get into anxiety and that rumination, that thought and belief could begin to emerge even when things go well. Oh, there was an off day, right? That becomes the exception instead of the rule. And so it's important just as if we don't take responsibility for others' good behavior, to also recognize that people do what's in their heart to do. If you reached your hand out to 10 people, you would receive 10 different greetings or not. Your hand would be met 10 different ways because you have the same hand and you're reaching it probably the same way. And these 10 different people have a unique way of joining in with that hand. And so, in order to resolve rumination, it is important for you to release yourself from responsibility for the circumstances of your relationships and understanding that you did not create these dynamics, especially as a child. You were born into them. You had no hand in the decisions that the other people made. And my heart goes out to you because it is a really sad reality to recognize that, and then to recognize that the people that you held on this pedestal were not worthy of it. And it just spirals into all sorts of other beliefs and thoughts that are important to work through and process, especially in therapy or with someone that you trust. But understanding that you are not responsible is the first step to letting go. It's the step that you need to even let go of this idea that you need closure. Because closure in a toxic relationship isn't going to come from someone who's toxic. It comes from you. You close the loop. You say, okay, this was a terrible thing. I didn't show up for myself in ways that I needed to. I made a bad decision and chose the wrong person. And now I need to choose something different. And so if that's you and you need to begin to choose differently and you want to be clearer about the patterns that you've fallen into, I want to invite you to take the Relationship Pattern Diagnostic. The link for the diagnostic will be found in the description. And I want to also invite you to just connect with me, right? Because a lot of what you are doing, it is sort of wrapped in trauma. It's wrapped in the understanding of a child. And I want to help you to see things differently. So if that's you and you want to begin to connect with yourself, you want to begin to understand yourself, I'm also going to drop the link to join the next chapter, which is my email community, where you will receive a wealth of information on a monthly basis. I don't inundate you with a lot of emails. I do introduce myself initially and introduce what we do here at the other side. But outside of that, once you make it through the initial phase of introductions, you'll receive an email from me a couple of times a month, just sharing with you thoughts and nuggets from the other side and how you can get here and the ways in which you are maybe complicit with your own pain. And I want you to be complicit with your own pleasure. I want you to be a new person who, again, develops this blueprint for healthy, lasting love and sets aside the old way of doing things that hurt you. So I want to thank you for joining me today. I really hope this helped. Please hit the like button. Doesn't cost you anything. Also subscribe so that you are made aware when new videos drop here on Break Free Sundays. Thank you, and I will see you next time. Bye.